So hello everybody, thank you so much for being here and taking the time to try to understand how the legal is evolving. It's not necessarily a very fancy topic, but it is an important one. Before I dive into the topic, I just wanted to say hello, say who I am. So I'm Sophie, Stalla-Bourdillon. I work at Immuta. I am Senior Privacy Counsel there. And I sit within the legal engineering team. What is Immuta? Very quickly, Immuta is a SaaS offering that enforces data policies to meet the data privacy and security needs of all your CISOs, CIOs, CDOs, CROs, CPOs, many of your Cs within your organization. And how do we innovate? By merging three types of insights. Insight coming from engineering research, from UX research, and legal engineering research. And this is where I sit, trying to look at the implications of the legal requirements for the product and the roadmap. So let's go back to the topic and the title. The new post-Brexit take on GDPR is coming. But what will it mean for customer privacy, innovation analytics, and the future of data science? Quite an ambitious title for the talk today. To give you some context, let's rewind a little bit so that you get the timeline right. I'm sure you know GDPR became applicable back in 2018. We had the referendum, the Brexit referendum before that date, so a few years later, the government started to draft its strategy to try to renovate and modernize the framework. And that started with the National Data Strategy, which was also a consultation, so we also got a response to that consultation. We got a new consultation in 21, data, a new direction, and then finally, this summer, a bill trying to, as I said, modernize and adapt the UK GDPR. So how did it start, that renovation process? With the National Data Strategy, what do we have in it? Bold objectives. The idea is to, the starting point actually is that data should be seen as an opportunity rather than a threat. And the goal is to try to maintain a regulatory regime that is not overly burdensome for smaller businesses and that supports responsible innovation. We've got lots of missions within it, but the first two are very important, unlocking the value of data across the economy and to try to secure a pro-growth and trusted data regime. And then we got a new consultation, data, a new direction. And in that consultation, this is where we got the bold ideas. Not always very good ideas, but very bold ideas. Try to scrap, in particular, some parts of the GDPR. The objective is essentially still the same, try to realize the benefits of greater personal data use and try to get rid of all the barriers to a responsible use of personal data. Then we got more digging. And as I said, this summer, we got the Data Protection and Digital Information Bill. So the big question is, what is in this bill? Is it actually achieving its targets, meeting its objectives? There are 5. So this is very small, but don't even try to read. Just to give you the big picture, there are 5 big objectives. The first one is to try to reduce barriers to responsible innovation. The second is to try to reduce burdens on businesses, try to deliver better outcomes for people. Third, try to boost trade and reduce barriers to data flows. Then deliver better public services, and finally reform the UK regulator, the Information Commissioner's Office. So today let's focus upon the 3 first objectives, which would be and should be relevant, in particular within big data or data science environments. First objective, try to clarify the framework. Yeah, why? Why should we do that? To reduce legal uncertainty. Sure, you know, if there is too much legal uncertainty, then it's much more difficult for businesses to operate and develop new products. So let's take an example. Within a data science environment, one question that you often get, or that the compliance team often gets, is, can I reuse the personal data that I have? And my data scientist goes to the compliance team and then to the lawyer, that's my lawyer on the screen, and he says, well, it depends. And then very often you also get a checklist of questions, trying to break down the problem. Is your new processing purpose compatible with your original processing purpose? Can you demonstrate that your new processing purpose is not generating high risks for individuals? Do you comply with the full set of data protection principles? Have you heard about data minimization? Have you heard about purpose limitation? How do you make sure that individuals can exercise their rights? And finally, by the way, are you transferring any data to a third country to fulfill your new processing purpose? This is where my data scientist starts to have privacy headaches. That being said, if we go back to my checklist, the first question, at least from a compliance perspective, is quite important. If you know whether your secondary purpose, your reuse purpose, is actually compatible with your initial purpose, then that should make your compliance journey easier. So the question is, do we get some clarification within the bill on that question? There is an attempt to try to simplify and clarify the rules around compatibility of purposes. And this is what you have in the bill. This is not the entire section, but as you can see, there is the word compatible within it. So there is an attempt to make things clearer. When is it that have a compatible secondary purpose? In different situations. First, when you get consent. Second, when you are doing research or scientific research. Third, when you are trying to demonstrate compliance. And fourth, once you can find a scenario within Annex 2. Is this really simplifying the picture? I'm not sure. Unless you fall within the definition of scientific research. My writing is in blue on the screen. As you can see, that means this is all new wording in the bill. So we've got a new definition of research in the bill. Scientific research means reference to processing for the purposes of any research that can reasonably be described as scientific, whether publicly or privately funded, including processing for the purposes of technological development or demonstration, fundamental research, or applied research. So it's a broader definition. The question is whether your activity actually falls within that definition. Probably not always. Now, what do I have with within my Annex 2? Again, this is all in blue. This is all new. Things about public security, emergencies, crime, protection of vital interests of individuals, and then safeguarding vulnerable individuals. Nothing really that should be that exciting for my data scientist. So the upshot here is, I'm not entirely sure. We've got lots of clarification. Although I would need to add that the Secretary of State also has some power to amend my Annex 2. Whether that will mean simplification for the data scientist, I'm not sure. Another question that I always get as well is, which legal basis can I use to justify the processing of the data? Legal basis essentially means justification for the processing. Again, if you go and talk to your lawyer, you will get the answer, it depends. And if you don't want to use consent as a legal basis, so if you don't want to try to ground your processing on the consent of an individual, that is possible, but you need to understand that it could sometimes be a little bit complicated, because if you want to base the processing on a legitimate interest, then you will need to do an assessment, which is called the legitimate interest assessment, LIA. And if you do that, then that means answering some questions. And this is the template of the document that you would find, for example, on the website of the UK regulator. Do we have clarification on how we should be performing an assessment? Do we still need to perform an assessment if you've got a legitimate interest? What is the bill saying? Again, we've got some new blue text in the bill. We've got this new notion of recognized legitimate interest in the bill. So there is an attempt to try to clarify and simplify the framework. But what is a recognized legitimate interest? This time, I've got annex number 1. As you can see, it's all in blue, once more time. And again, I find things about national security, public security and defense, emergencies, crime, safeguarding individuals. Nothing really that should be that exciting for my data scientists, unfortunately. So the upshot of the clarification is, again, mixed feelings. Another important question is about the technique that you use to protect the data. What does it mean to secure personal data through pseudonymization? And does it make sense to pseudonymize data within a data science environment? Pseudonymization is the big data word. Yeah? If you talk to lawyers, their first reaction is going to be pseudonymize your data. That's a best practice security measure that is actually mentioned within the UK data protection regime. And what do we find? We find within the bill a revised definition of the term pseudonymization. Is it an improvement? It is, from my perspective, at least, because there is one clarification that is very important. We need to make it clear that pseudonymization is different from anonymization, okay? And so when you pseudonymize the data, the individual remains identifiable. He remains indirectly identifiable. That was not entirely clear within the previous definition. Now it's much clearer with the new definition. That being said, if I look at the definition and I look at other new definitions within the bill, in particular in relation to the definition of personal data and what it means to be indirectly identifiable, then I get mixed feelings. Actually, if I want to be very honest, the clearest piece of guidance is to be found on the website of the RCO, and in particular within the new code of practice on anonymization, pseudonymization, privacy-enhancing technologies. What do I find? I find a definition of pseudonymization that refers to techniques that replace, remove, or transform information that identifies an individual. For example, replacing one or more identifiers, which are easily attributed to individuals, with a pseudonym. Okay? And second, which is very important, pseudonymization also allows you to perform general analysis on the data. What is meant by general analysis? Analytics on the data. As long as you are not taking decisions about individuals or impacting the way individuals should be behaving directly. So if you are taking actions about individuals, then you are not doing general analysis anymore. Okay? But at least when you are building your profiles, this should be general analysis. If you pseudonymize, you are in a very good place then to claim compliance. Phew. Thank you, ICO. Second mission or second goal, try to streamline operational compliance. Within the bill, we have a clear shift towards privacy management. What that means that, in principle, we are trying to alleviate the compliance burden that is set on the businesses. So we don't have any recording obligations for SMEs under 250 people, unless there is high risk. There was something similar to that already in GDPR, but that was less clear. No DPOs anymore. But when you are processing and that amounts to high risk, you need to have senior responsible individuals. And the requirements around data protection impact assessment are made easier to comply with. And the obligation also to review your DPIAs is maybe, probably, likely to be less burdensome. Let's pause for a minute, though, and stretch our legs. There are three very important things that you need to understand when you are doing data science and when you are evolving within a complex data ecosystem. Data discovery and mapping is inevitable. Yeah? Even if you have a reduced burden, a compliance burden on that particular point, you will have to do that. Risk assessment is also inevitable. If you do monitoring and you want to do it well, you will need to prioritize and you will need to understand where the risks are. And finally, very importantly, the earlier you get your act together, the earlier compliance scales. So even if you are small, if you think early about the pain points, then that's going to be a win for the organization and a win for the individuals. So be careful. Don't get the message wrongly. Yeah? Even if you are trying to streamline the compliance burden, you need to understand what needs to be done in order to be able to prevent and avoid data breaches. Because if you've got a data breach, then the liability will be there. This is not going to disappear. Finally, simplifying international data flows. What do we get in the bill? Again, some new wording. It's all blue on my screen here. We get a new test for international data transfer to determine whether your third country has an adequate framework so that you can transfer the data to that third country. It's meant to be business friendly, a little bit more than the test that we have under EU law. That being said, be careful. Yeah? If your data is coming from different sources and different jurisdictions and you've got interactions with the European Union, then you need to be aware of the European test and the European rules. Okay? So it's not because the UK test is suddenly becoming easier to meet that everything changes. And in fact, in order to maintain the flows between the EU and the UK, we have today in place an adequacy decision that has been issued by the European Commission a year ago. In 3 years, that might change depending upon how the UK data protection framework will evolve. So it's still good practice to know what the EU standard is if you are doing business with the EU. So what? Don't be overexcited. As I said, the bill generates mixed feelings. What's the best way to reduce burdens for businesses? Well, it's to provide clear, detailed guidance. Where is this coming from? Most likely from the regulator, the ICO. So if there is a place to watch and to see, this is the ICO. It's also to show how compliance can scale. When you have got very complex data ecosystem, you want to know how you can scale compliance to make it work in practice. And again, that can be done through development of use cases, and the ICO has been working on use cases in a few sectors. And to promote privacy-preserving practices, again, this is on the agenda of the ICO. If you look at the new chapters of the code, you are going to see that they are going to have a list of use cases to explain how and when new pets can be used. What will the DPDIB mean for customer privacy innovation analytics and the future of data science? At this stage, well, I don't exactly know. And my advice would be careful. Look at the overall environment, not only one piece of the puzzle. The Secretary of State has power to actually amend and add to what we have already, so we shall wait and see what happens in the future. What should be the next step, though? Probably not to scrap compliance budgets. And remember, my three very important things. Data discovery and mapping is inevitable. Risk assessment is also inevitable. The earlier you get your act together, the earlier compliance scales. And one last thing, enforce your rules to avoid their breaches. And that's the end of my presentation. And if you have questions, if you want to know more about discovery, data observability, monitoring, and policy enforcement, you can see us at Immuta, booth 825. Thank you. I don't know whether I've got some time for questions, but I'll be around and at the booth as well.